What would you do if you found the woman you once loved, the mother of your child, digging through trash cans just to stay alive? How do you even breathe when she looks you in the eyes and tells you she destroyed her life to save the very son who now calls you both useless? I thought I was walking over to give my ex-wife a few dollars out of pity, but what she told me on that sidewalk tore my world in half and turned me into someone my family never saw coming. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe, hit the hype button, and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? My name is Graham Holt. I'm 58 years old, and I work as an operations administrator at Clayton Electrical Services. To most people, that means I'm the guy who fixes the schedules when electricians call in late, who finds the missing permits when inspectors show up early, and who makes sure the vans have gas and the tools don't disappear from job sites. It's not glamorous. My son Evan, who's a field supervisor at the same company, likes to joke that I'm old-school baggage, a relic from before everything went digital. This morning started like every other. The dispatch board was chaos. 3 guys called in saying their trucks wouldn't start. 2 permits hadn't been filed for a commercial job that was supposed to begin at 7. The new dispatcher, a kid barely out of college, was close to tears because a client was screaming about a no-show crew. I walked in with my coffee, sat down at my desk in the open plan office, and fixed it. 20 minutes. I rerouted 2 crews, found backup trucks in the yard, called the permit office and sweet-talked and expedited filing, and sent the missing team to the right address with an apology and a discount voucher. The dispatcher looked at me like I'd performed magic. Evan, standing by the coffee machine with his phone in one hand, looked at me like I'd just reminded everyone how old I was. "Nice save, Dad," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Though maybe next time we should upgrade the system instead of relying on a guy who remembers when we used paper maps. A few people laughed. I didn't respond. I just went back to my desk and opened the next file. By lunch, I'd handled 16 separate crises, and nobody said thank you. That's fine. I don't need applause. I need the company to run, because if it doesn't, people lose their jobs, and I've seen what that does to families. Around noon, Evan called me down to the warehouse. He was standing in front of a group of crew leaders, arms crossed, looking annoyed. When I walked over, he pointed at a van with the hood open. "This unit was supposed to go out on the Riverside job this morning," he said. "But someone," he looked directly at me, "put the wrong job code in the system, so it sat here for 3 hours." I frowned. I'd checked that code myself before I left yesterday, but when I pulled up the tablet and scrolled through the dispatch log, I saw the change. Time-stamped at 6:45 this morning, right after Evan clocked in. He'd changed it. And now he was blaming me in front of 5 guys who respected him and saw me as the office grandpa. I could have said something. I could have pulled up the edit history and proven it. But what would that accomplish? Evan would say it was an honest mistake, or that I'd misread the original entry, and I'd look like a paranoid old man trying to cover his tracks. So I nodded. "My error. I'll double-check codes before end of shift from now on." Evan smiled. "Appreciate it, Dad. We all make mistakes." The crew leaders walked away. Evan stayed behind just long enough to clap me on the shoulder and say, "You're doing great for your age, really." I wanted to respond, but I didn't. I swallowed the anger and walked back to the office. The afternoon dragged. More calls, more problems, more young guys walking past my desk like I was a museum exhibit they couldn't quite figure out how to retire. At 3 o'clock, Paige showed up. Evan's wife. She's 30, blonde, and always dressed like she's about to attend a networking event. She brought coffee, 2 cups, one for Evan, one for herself, none for me. She perched on the edge of Evan's desk in the middle of the open office and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Honey, I was thinking, maybe we should talk to your dad about moving into something smaller. You know, before he has an accident on those stairs. My friend's mom went into a really nice assisted living place. They have activities and everything." A few people glanced over. Evan laughed and kissed her cheek. We'll talk to him about it. I'm serious, Paige continued. I worry about him. At his age, you never know. I kept typing, kept my face neutral. But inside, something cold was forming. I finished my shift, clocked out at 5, and started the drive home. On the way, I stopped at the supermarket. I needed milk, bread, and something easy for dinner, probably a frozen meal I could microwave in my tiny apartment kitchen. The parking lot was half empty. The sky was turning that dull gray that comes before full dark. I parked near the entrance and started walking toward the doors. That's when I saw her. At first, I didn't recognize her. She was just another person at the bottle return station, bent over a shopping cart, pulling out cans and counting them. She wore layers, a stained jacket over a hoodie over what looked like 2 shirts. Her hair was pulled back under a knit cap, and her hands were red and rough. But when she turned her head to check if anyone was watching, I saw her face. Nora, my ex-wife. The woman I'd been married to for 26 years, the mother of my son. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I crossed the lot and stopped a few feet away from her. Nora! She froze. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, I thought she might run. Then her face closed down, and she turned back to her cart. I'm fine, Graham. Just go home. What happened? Why are you? I said I'm fine. Her voice was tight, clipped. I don't need anything from you. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could say anything, a company van rolled past the parking lot entrance. The logo on the side, Clayton Electrical Services, caught the last of the daylight. Nora flinched so hard she knocked into her cart. Cans spilled across the asphalt, rolling in every direction. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather them, and I saw her hands shaking. I crouched down next to her. Nora, talk to me, please. She didn't look up. She just kept grabbing cans, shoving them back into a plastic bag, her breath coming fast and shallow. And that's when I realized she wasn't just broke. She was terrified. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table in my rented apartment, a place so small I could touch 3 walls from the center of the room, and stared at the milk I'd bought but hadn't opened. Nora, on the street, collecting cans. It didn't make sense. When we divorced 8 years ago, she'd insisted she was fine. She'd said she had some savings, that she'd pick up bookkeeping work like she used to do, and that I should focus on making sure Evan had what he needed. I'd believed her, or maybe I'd just been too tired to ask questions. The divorce had been Evan's idea, in a way, not officially, but he'd been the one to sit me down a few months after Nora moved out and explain what really happened. We'd been at the old house, the family house, the one I'd bought 32 years ago when Evan was born, the one with the backyard and the 2-car garage and the mortgage I'd finally paid off 5 years before the divorce. Evan and his wife Paige had been staying there more and more, helping me keep it clean, they said, though I never asked for help. It was Christmas. Paige had put up a tree. Evan poured us both whiskey and told me I needed to understand the full story. Mom didn't just leave because you two grew apart, he said. She made some really bad financial decisions, burned through money, almost ruined my career at the company because of some insurance mess she caused. I know you want to be loyal to her, Dad, but she was reckless, selfish. Paige nodded from the couch. It's hard to accept, Graham, but sometimes people just aren't who you thought they were. I'd asked what insurance mess. Evan had waved it off. It's handled now. I took care of it, but it cost me a lot, professionally and personally. That's why Mom left. She knew she'd screwed up, and she didn't want to face it. And I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. Nora had been distant for months before the divorce. She'd cried sometimes late at night, but when I asked what was wrong, she just said she was tired. I'd assumed it was menopause, or stress, or the slow unraveling of a marriage that had lasted longer than either of us expected. So I signed the papers. Nora took almost nothing. No alimony, no claim on the house, just a small cash settlement that I assumed would tide her over until she found steady work. I moved into this apartment. Evan and Paige started using the house as their base, talking about renovations and futures, and how eventually I'd downsize and they'd take care of the place. I'd thought it was natural. A son stepping into his father's role, a family evolving. But now I couldn't stop seeing Nora's hands, red and shaking, grabbing cans off the pavement. A memory surfaced. Years ago, maybe 2 years before the divorce, Nora had tried to talk to me about something. It was late. I'd just gotten home from a double shift. She was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her, and when I walked in, she looked up with tears on her face. "Graham, I need to tell you about the accident." I'd been so tired. "What accident?" "The one with Evan, the van." "I need to—" "Nora, it's past midnight. Can we do this tomorrow?" She'd looked at me for a long moment, then gathered up the papers and said, "Yeah, tomorrow." We never talked about it again. I rubbed my eyes and stood up. My phone was on the counter, plugged in and glowing. I picked it up, scrolled through my texts, and stopped at the most recent message. It was from my bank, sent 3 hours ago. Inquiry made regarding joint ownership addition to property at 4728 Maple Drive. Requested by Evan Holt. Please contact us to confirm or decline. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my contacts, found Evan's name and typed, "What's this about the house?" The reply came back in less than a minute. "Just getting some paperwork in order, Dad. We'll talk about it soon. Nothing to worry about." I put the phone down and looked at the old wedding photo on my shelf. Nora in a simple white dress, me in a suit I'd borrowed. We'd gotten married at City Hall because we couldn't afford anything bigger. Evan was born 7 months later. That woman in the photo wouldn't have burned through money. She'd been the one who balanced our checkbook down to the penny, who clipped coupons, who made sure we never carried credit card debt. So what happened? And why did she flinch when she saw a company van? I sat back down and pulled out a notebook, started writing. Dates, events, things Evan had said, things Nora had tried to say. The timeline didn't add up. The story didn't make sense. By 3 a.m, I had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. I'd been lied to. The next day, I drove to the old house after work. I didn't call ahead. I just parked in the driveway and walked up to the door I used to own. Evan answered, holding a beer. "Hey, Dad, what's up? Can I come in?" He stepped aside. "Course, it's still your house." He said it like a joke. Inside, Paige was sitting on the couch with a laptop and a stack of color swatches. She smiled when she saw me. "Graham, perfect timing. We're planning the nursery." I stopped. "Nursery?" "Well, future nursery," Paige said, laughing. "We're not pregnant yet, but we want to be ready. This room," she gestured toward what used to be my home office, "gets the best light. We're thinking soft yellow walls. Gender neutral, you know?" Evan sat down next to her and draped an arm over her shoulders. "We figured it's time to start making this place ours. Really, ours." I stood there, still wearing my work jacket, and felt like I was watching a play where I'd forgotten my lines. "The house is still in my name." "For now," Paige said brightly. She tapped her laptop screen. "But we've been talking to someone about estate planning. You know, to make sure everything's smooth when the time comes. It's actually better for you, tax-wise, if we handle some of this stuff now." Evan leaned forward. "We brought dinner, by the way. Paige made lasagna. You staying?" I stayed. I didn't know what else to do. Over dinner, they laid it out. Paige had printed papers, real papers, with legal headers, and she slid them across the table like we were closing a business deal. "This is just a preemptive transfer," she explained. "It protects you from estate taxes and makes sure that if anything happens, health issues, accidents, whatever, the house doesn't get tied up in probate." You'd still live here as long as you want. We'd just be co-owners. Co-owners, I repeated. It's standard, Evan said. And honestly, Dad, this place is a lot for you to maintain. The yard, the heating bills, the stairs. A smaller apartment might actually be safer. I looked at him. Safer. You're not getting any younger. He said it gently, like he was worried about me. And after what happened with Mom, how she mismanaged everything, we just want to make sure you're protected. There it was again. The story about Nora, the reckless, selfish woman who almost destroyed Evan's career. I picked up the papers, scanned the first page, saw words like joint tenancy and transfer of deed and irrevocable. I need to think about it, I said. Paige's smile tightened. Of course. Take your time. But Evan leaned back and sighed, and I saw something flicker across his face. Irritation, impatience. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you. You're being selfish if you cling to a house you can't manage just because of pride. The word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish. The same word he'd used to describe Nora. I stood up. I'll think about it, I said again, and I left before either of them could argue. That night, I drove to the shelter district downtown. I didn't know if Nora would be there, but it was the only place I could think to look. The streets were dark, lined with closed storefronts and the occasional figure hunched in a doorway. I passed a church with a small crowd outside, people waiting for a meal service to open. I found her there, sitting on a low wall with a styrofoam cup of soup. When she saw me, she looked away. I sat down next to her. I'll buy you a real meal, please. She didn't answer for a long time. Then she stood up, dumped the soup in a trash can and said, "One meal, then you leave me alone." We went to a fast food place a few blocks away. I ordered her a burger, fries, and a soda. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, fast, methodical, barely looking up. When she finally slowed down, I said, "Tell me what happened." She wiped her mouth with a napkin. Her hands were still shaking. Why? So you can feel sorry for me? So you can tell Evan and Paige that his crazy mother is even worse off than they thought? Nora? I'm fine, Graham. I've been fine for 8 years. Just go home. You're collecting cans. Her jaw tightened. So? So that's not fine. I leaned forward. And you flinched when you saw the company van. Why? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something break behind her eyes. Because your son almost ended someone's life, she said quietly, and I'm the one who paid for it. She told me everything. Right there in a booth that smelled like grease and old coffee, she told me the truth I should have asked for years ago. 10 years back, Evan had gone to a crew party after a long job. He'd been drinking. Not heavily, he'd claimed, but enough. On the way home, driving a company van, he'd run a red light and struck a pedestrian crossing the street. The person lived but barely. Broken bones, internal injuries, surgeries, months of physical therapy, permanent nerve damage. Evan had called Nora in a panic. She'd driven to the scene, talked to the police, talked to the victim's family, and realized that if the truth came out, that Evan had been drinking, that he'd taken a company vehicle without proper authorization, he'd face criminal charges, possibly prison. At minimum, his career would be over before it started. So she made a deal. A private settlement. She took out a loan, a predatory, high-interest nightmare from a company that specializes in desperate situations, and paid the victim's family directly. She signed papers that said the accident was due to administrative confusion, and that she, as the family bookkeeper who sometimes helped with company paperwork, had mixed up insurance details. She took the blame. Publicly. Officially. The loan had crushed her. The interest was brutal. For years, she'd been paying it off in silence, working side jobs, draining her savings, selling anything of value. When the divorce came, she couldn't tell me the truth, because Evan had begged her not to, and because she still believed that protecting her son was the right thing to do. "I thought he'd help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After the divorce, when he was settled and making good money. I thought he'd remember what I did for him. He promised, Graham. He and Paige both promised they'd send money every month to help me finish paying it off. And they didn't." She shook her head. "Not once. Instead, they told everyone I was reckless, that I'd ruined Evan's career with my mistakes. They made me the villain so no one would ask questions. And when I tried to reach out, to remind them of what they'd promised, Paige sent me a message saying I should be grateful they weren't suing me for the damage I'd caused." I sat there, frozen. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles ached. "I did it to save our son's life, Graham," Nora said. Tears were running down her face now. "And he let me rot. He watched me lose everything and he didn't care, as long as his life looked perfect." I walked her back to the shelter. She didn't say anything else. When we got to the door, she turned to me and said, "Don't try to fix this. You can't. And don't tell him you saw me. It'll just make things worse." Then she went inside. I sat in my car for an hour, staring at nothing, feeling something cold and methodical take shape in my chest. Then I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and found a name I hadn't called in years. Martin Olson, legal. I pressed the button and listened to it ring. The bank was quiet at 9 in the morning. I sat across from a clerk named Angela, who looked about 30, and wore a name tag that said Member Services. "I need information about any loans or liens connected to my ex-wife," I said. "Nora Kendall, and I need to know about recent inquiries on my property." Angela typed, frowned, typed some more. "I can pull records, but I'll need confirmation of identity and—" "I'm Graham Holt. The house at 4728 Maple is in my name. Nora Kendall was my wife for 26 years. Whatever you need, I'll sign it." She printed forms. I signed them. 20 minutes later, she slid a folder across the desk. "There's a private loan here," she said slowly. "Opened 11 years ago in Nora Kendall's name. High interest rate. Honestly, this looks like one of those settlement loans. Predatory lending. It's been paid down substantially over the years, but she still owes a significant balance." "How much?" she told me. My stomach turned. It was more than most people make in 2 years. "And the house?" Angela pulled up another screen. "There was an inquiry last week. Someone named Evan Holt contacted us about adding his name to the deed and exploring refinancing options. We told him he'd need your written consent and that you'd have to come in to authorize any changes." "Did he say why?" She hesitated. "He said you were getting older and that he wanted to make sure the property was protected if you became incapacitated." I took copies of everything and left. That afternoon, I went to Harvey Clayton's office. Harvey's been running Clayton Electrical for 30 years. He's a good man, old school, fair, the kind of guy who believes in hard work and handshake deals. But he's also busy, and he trusts his supervisors to handle field operations. I knocked on his open door. He looked up from a stack of invoices and waved me in. "Graham, what do you need?" "I need to see the incident file from the van accident, 10 years ago, the one involving Evan." Harvey's face went neutral. "That was handled internally. Why are you asking now?" "Because I don't think it was handled correctly." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened his filing cabinet, pulled out an old folder, and set it on the desk. "You've got 5 minutes." I read fast. The report listed the accident as administrative error with no driver fault. But there were notes in the margin, handwritten by someone I didn't recognize. "Driver admitted consumption prior to shift. Family settled privately. Case closed per management." There was also a copy of the settlement agreement, vague, deliberately obscure, but it referenced a private party payment and absolved the company of liability. I took pictures with my phone. "Harvey," I said carefully, "did you know Evan had been drinking?" Harvey's jaw tightened. "It was handled, Graham. The family was compensated. Evan learned his lesson. We moved on. My ex-wife took out a loan to pay that family. She's been living on the street because of it. Harvey didn't say anything, but I saw something shift in his eyes. Surprise, maybe shame. I left his office and walked out to the warehouse. Sergio Alvarez was there, checking a tool inventory. Sergio's been with the company for 15 years. He's solid, trustworthy. And he was on Evan's crew the night of the accident. I pulled him aside. I need you to tell me the truth about what happened that night. The accident, the van. Sergio looked uncomfortable. Man, that was a long time ago. I know, but I need to hear it. He glanced around, then sighed. Evan had been drinking, not falling down wasted, but enough that we could smell it. We told him not to drive. He said he was fine, that he'd only had a couple of beers. When the accident happened, we thought he was done. Finished. But then his mom showed up and talked to management, and suddenly it was all administrative confusion and insurance mix-up. We were told to keep quiet and move on, so we did. Why didn't anyone speak up? Sergio shrugged. Evan's the boss's favorite, and his mom took the fall. What were we supposed to do? I thanked him and walked back to my car. That evening, I sat in Martin Olson's law office. Martin's a few years older than me, with gray hair and reading glasses he wears on a chain. We'd worked together once, years ago, on a safety committee case involving workers' compensation. He remembered me. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back. This is a mess, but it's fixable. How? He tapped his pen on the pad. First, we protect your assets. I'll draft a new will and set up a trust that shields the house from any claims Evan or Paige might make. We'll also file a formal objection to any deed changes with your bank and the county recorder's office. Second, we document everything you've found, the loan, the settlement, the company records. If Evan tries to push you, we push back with facts and legal structure. What about Nora? Martin smiled. We make sure she's taken care of. The trust can include provisions for her housing and monthly support. Not charity, compensation for what she sacrificed. We frame it as restitution. How long will this take? 2 weeks if we move fast. But you can't tip your hand. Act normal. Don't confront anyone. Let them think you're still considering their plan. I nodded. I can do that. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved like a ghost through my own life. At work, I smiled and nodded. I let Evan make jokes about my age. I let Paige drop by with coffee and talk about their future plans, as if I wasn't standing right there. But every night, I was in Martin's office, signing papers, reviewing documents, building a structure that couldn't be undone. I pulled digital copies of old emails, timesheets, expense reports. I found patterns. Evan charging personal expenses to company accounts, Evan claiming overtime he didn't work, Evan using company equipment for side jobs that weren't documented. I saved everything to a USB drive I kept in my pocket. One afternoon, I accidentally asked Evan to explain the house transfer to me again, slowly, like I was confused and needed help understanding. He walked me through it, step by step, getting more confident and more arrogant with every sentence. You don't need this place, Dad. You can't even climb the stairs without getting winded. And honestly, after the way Mom almost tanked my career with her screw-ups, you should be grateful I'm willing to take care of things. Most people would just walk away. I recorded every word. On a Friday afternoon, Paige sent a message to the family group chat. Special dinner next week. Downtown restaurant, private room. Let's celebrate a new phase for the Holt family. Dress nice. Evan texted me separately. We'll finalize the house stuff then. Bring your ID. We might need to notarize some things. Don't worry. It's all for your protection. I replied, sounds great. Looking forward to it. That weekend, Martin called. Everything's ready. The trust is established. The will is updated. All filings are complete. Once you present this to them, there's no going back. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. I spent the weekend in my apartment, laying out everything on the kitchen table like a battle plan. Timeline, evidence, documents, the accident, the loan, the settlement, Evan's promotions, the divorce, the house inquiries, the company expense records, the audio recording. For the first time, I saw the whole picture, and it made me sick. Nora had sacrificed everything to save Evan, and Evan had turned around and used that sacrifice to destroy her reputation, steal her dignity, and position himself to take my house. He'd built his entire comfortable life on her suffering. My son. The person I'd worked 60-hour weeks to support. The kid I'd taught to ride a bike, to tie a tie, to shake hands and look people in the eye. The kid I'd been proud of. He'd turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to know. On Monday morning, I went back to Martin's office. He had a stack of papers waiting for me, clean, organized, and ready to execute. "New will," he said, handing me the first set. "Evan and Paige are removed as beneficiaries. Your assets go into a trust managed by an independent executor, me, if you're comfortable with that. The trust will cover your living expenses for the rest of your life, and any remaining assets will be distributed according to your instructions." I signed. "Trust documents," he continued. "The house is transferred into the trust, with specific provisions guaranteeing Nora a modest apartment, rent paid for life, and monthly support sufficient to cover her basic needs. The trust cannot be altered by any party except you, and upon your passing, it continues under the executor's supervision." "Nora is protected," I signed. "Formal objection to deed changes," Martin said. "Filed with the county recorder's office in your bank. Evan cannot add his name to the property without committing fraud, and we've flagged the account to prevent any unauthorized changes." I signed. "And this," Martin said, handing me the last document, "is an agreement with Harvey Clayton. I spoke with him personally. He's reviewed the evidence you provided regarding Evan's conduct, the accident cover-up, the expense misuse, the safety violations, the lies to company management. Pending a formal internal review, Evan's supervisory role is suspended immediately. If the review confirms what we already know, he'll be terminated." I signed. Martin sat back and folded his hands. "Everything's filed. It's done. Once you show them this, they can't undo it. The law is on your side now." "Thank you. One more thing." He pulled out a small envelope. "Keys to Nora's apartment. It's in a safe building, walking distance to a grocery store and a bus line. First 6 months paid in advance. After that, the trust covers it automatically." I took the envelope and felt its weight in my hand. At work that week, Evan was unbearable. He strutted around the office like he already owned the place. He bragged to coworkers about the big changes coming and how he was finally stepping into his full potential. He joked about how I'd see sense and stop hoarding a house I couldn't take care of anymore. One afternoon, he cornered me in the break room while other employees were getting coffee. "You ready for Friday?" he asked, grinning. "I think you're really going to like what we've planned. It's time for the Holt family to move forward, you know? Time for me to take the reins." I smiled. "I'm sure it'll be memorable." He clapped me on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, Dad. I'm proud of you for being mature about this." I wanted to tell him what I really thought, but I didn't. I just nodded and walked away. On Thursday, I went back to the shelter district and found Nora sorting through donated clothes outside the church. "Nora," I said, "I need you to come with me tomorrow night." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Where?" "Family dinner. Evan and Paige planned it. Private room at a downtown restaurant. I need you there." "Graham, I can't. I don't have anything to wear and they'll just—" "Please." I held out the envelope. "I'm giving you something, but I need you to see it happen. I need you to be there when the truth comes out." She stared at the envelope, then at me, her eyes filled with tears. "What is this?" "Keys to an apartment. It's yours, paid for, safe, but I need you to trust me one more time." She took the envelope with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserved better." Because I should have asked questions years ago, and because Evan needs to face what he did. She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. On Friday morning, I straightened my tie in the bathroom mirror at home. My phone buzzed. A text from Martin. All filings confirmed. Everything is locked in. If they push you tonight, you have every legal right to shut them down. Good luck. I replied, thank you for everything. Then I put on my jacket, picked up the USB drive, and drove to work for what I knew would be my last normal day. The restaurant was downtown, the kind of place with soft lighting and tables covered in white cloth. The private room was in the back, separated from the main dining area by a heavy curtain. When I arrived at 7, Evan, Paige, Harvey, Sergio, and a handful of other co-workers and distant relatives were already seated around a long table. Paige had gone all out. She'd printed mock-up renovation plans and spread them across one end of the table. Paint swatches, furniture layouts, fabric samples. There was even a small banner hanging on the wall that said, "The future starts now," in elegant script. Evan stood up when he saw me and pulled me into a hug. There he is, the man of the hour. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Paige gestured to an empty chair at the head of the table. We saved you the best seat, Graham. Tonight's all about you. I didn't sit. Instead, I turned back toward the curtain and said, I brought someone. Nora stepped through. She was wearing a simple dress, something she must have found at the donation center, and her hair was pulled back. She looked small and nervous, but she was there. The room went silent. Paige's face twisted with disgust. What is she doing here? I invited her, I said calmly. She's family. Evan stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. Dad, this is a family dinner. She's not. She's the mother of my son, I interrupted. That makes her family. Sit down, Evan. He sat, but his face was red and his jaw was clenched. I pulled out a chair for Nora. She sat, staring at the table, her hands folded in her lap. Evan tried to take control. He cleared his throat, forced a smile, and pulled out a leather folder from under his chair. Okay, well, let's not let this distract us. We're here to celebrate and to take care of some important business. Dad, we have paperwork here that'll make everything official. Transfer of ownership for the house. Simple, clean, and it protects you from legal complications down the road. All you have to do is sign, and we can get it notarized tonight. He slid the folder across the table toward me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and handed it to the restaurant manager, who'd been standing quietly by the door. Can you play this on the screen, please? The manager hesitated, glanced at Evan, then nodded. A moment later, the TV mounted on the wall flickered to life. The first image was a scanned document. Old, faded, but readable. A company incident report from Clayton Electrical Services, dated 10 years ago, with Evan's name clearly listed as the driver involved in a vehicular accident. Paige leaned forward, squinting. What is this? I didn't answer. The next image appeared, a private settlement agreement, a loan contract in Nora's name, a payment schedule showing monthly installments stretching back a decade. This, I said quietly, turning to face the room, is the truth. I walked to the front of the room, standing between the table and the screen. Every eye was on me. 10 years ago, I began, my voice steady. Evan crashed a company van after drinking at a crew party. He ran a red light and struck a pedestrian. The person survived, but barely. Broken bones, internal injuries, months of recovery, permanent nerve damage. Evan called Nora in a panic, and she made a choice. The screen changed again. Another document, the loan agreement with its brutal interest rate clearly visible. She took out a private loan, I continued, a predatory, high-interest loan from a company that preys on desperate people. She used that money to pay the victim's family directly, a private settlement to keep them from pressing charges. And then she signed papers saying the accident was her fault. That she, as someone who occasionally helped with company paperwork, had made an administrative error. She took the blame to keep Evan out of prison. Evan's face had gone pale. Paige was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open. "She's been paying off that loan ever since," I said. "For 10 years. She drained her savings, she lost her home. She ended up on the street, collecting cans to survive. And when the divorce happened, when I asked what went wrong, Evan and Paige told me that Nora was reckless, that she'd almost ruined Evan's career with her mistakes. They made her the villain so no one would ask questions." I turned to look at Evan. They promised her they'd help pay off the loan. They never sent a single dollar. Harvey was sitting at the far end of the table, his face like stone. Sergio was nodding slowly, confirming everything I'd said. The screen changed once more. This time it was an audio player interface. "This," I said, "is a recording I made last week. Evan explaining his plans for my house." I pressed play. Evan's voice filled the room, clear and confident. "You don't need this place, Dad. You can't even climb the stairs without getting winded. And honestly, after the way Mom almost tanked my career with her screw-ups, you should be grateful I'm willing to take care of things. Most people would just walk away." Then, a few seconds later, "I want the equity from that house. It's worth $400,000 easy. Mom already paid enough for my mistakes. More than enough. She made her choice. Now it's time for me to get what I'm owed." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Paige tried to stand, tried to say something, but Harvey's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Sit down." She sat. I pulled the legal documents from my jacket and laid them on the table in front of Evan. "These are real legal filings, completed 2 weeks ago. The house has been moved into a trust. I don't own it anymore. The trust does. And the trust has very specific instructions." I turned to Nora. "You have an apartment now. Rent paid for life. Monthly support to cover your expenses. It's compensation for what you lost, what you sacrificed." Nora's hands were shaking. Tears were streaming down her face. I turned back to Evan. "You and Paige are removed from my will. You won't get $1 when I'm gone. Everything goes into the trust to support people who actually deserve it." Evan's face was red now, his breathing fast. "You can't. This isn't legal. You can't just—" "It's completely legal," Martin Olson said from the doorway. I hadn't even realized he'd arrived. He walked into the room, calm and professional. "Every document is filed with the appropriate institutions. The trust is irrevocable. The bank has been notified. The county recorder's office has the deed transfer on record. There's nothing to challenge." Paige finally found her voice. She stood up, her chair clattering backward. "This is insane. You're punishing us for trying to help you. We were protecting you." "You were stealing from me," I said simply. "And you destroyed Nora to do it." Harvey stood up. His face was grim. "Evan, as of this moment, your supervisory position at Clayton Electrical is suspended. We'll be conducting a full internal review of your conduct, the accident cover-up, the expense discrepancies, the safety violations. If the review confirms what I'm seeing here tonight, you're done." Evan's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Sergio spoke up from his seat. "I'll testify about what really happened that night." 2 other co-workers nodded. I looked at Evan one last time. "I gave you everything. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you a future, and you used it to destroy the woman who saved your life. You're not the son I raised. You're not the man I thought you were." Nora was sobbing now, clutching the keys in her hand. Evan lunged forward, reaching for the documents on the table as if he could somehow tear them up and make this all go away. But there was nothing to grab. Everything was already filed, already done. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "You can't do this to us. We have plans. We have—" "You had a mother who loved you," I said, "and you threw her away." I turned to Nora and held out my hand. She took it, standing on shaking legs. Together, we walked toward the door. Behind us, Paige was screaming about lawyers and family and betrayal. Evan was on his phone, frantically trying to call someone, a lawyer maybe, or a friend who might tell him this was all fixable. Harvey's voice rose above the chaos. "Evan, put the phone down. It's over." I paused at the curtain and looked back one last time. Evan was standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by people who now knew exactly what he'd done. His perfect image was shattered. His future was gone. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Outside, the air was cool and clean. Nora stood on the sidewalk, staring at the keys in her hand like they might disappear if she blinked. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. "You deserved better." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Evan's name appeared on the screen, calling. I looked at it for a moment, then pressed block and slipped the phone away. Nora looked up at me, tears still on her face, and smiled. Really smiled. For the first time in years. And I smiled back.